our next talk. I'd like to bring to the stage George from MasterCard, and he's going to be talking about securing cryptography for the future. So please make him welcome.
Thanks, Billy. Just waiting for the slides to appear. That's good. That's me. I've got one here, thanks.
Yeah.
There's the slides, great. So welcome, I'm George, I work at MasterCard. The presentation I'm going to give today is not the official position of MasterCard, but it's stuff that I sort of work on and where we talked in the team about it and sort of have come to an opinion. The presentation uses a number of external images. Most of the images, or all of the images, are either under public domain or under Creative Commons, and I have a final slide where all of the image sources and artists are listed so that my presentation is not cluttered up with image references. If you want to get in touch with me, my LinkedIn is at the bottom of the slide. It's just my last name, basically. And yeah, looking forward to speaking with you. What I'm going to talk today about, basically, firstly, I'm going to give a quick overview of what we do at MasterCard and also what we do in my team, the Cryptographic Architecture and Engineering team. Then I'd like to look at quantum computers and do a bit of a technology comparison on them with other technologies that have been around in the last 100 years or 130 years. I want to look at quantum computers, quantum algorithms, and how we can use them to attack today's cryptography. And also want to look at how we can potentially protect ourselves today already from future attacks. And lastly, I want to give a quick outlook at what MasterCard has already done in the contactless payment systems to address these threats. So at MasterCard, we work at a global level, connecting billions of people, and we are one of the most trusted brands worldwide. That means we build and design critical systems, and the cryptographic and architecture team defines what MasterCard good cryptography looks like, and we provide the guidelines for our engineering teams to guide them, like our standards, and help them with the implementation. We design our systems for security, scalability, and speed, and so that we can make our customers happy and facilitate payments worldwide. The cryptographic architecture and engineering team that I work on defines the standards that have our cryptographic constructions that we use. We guide the engineering teams on using the cryptography for maximum benefit in the company. We also constantly review the cryptographic research and development in the world and discuss it openly and honestly in the team and trying to stay ahead of the curve. Then when we architect our systems, we look at scalability, security, and speed and use the best-in-class crypto for safeguarding our data. For the most important data that we have, we actually use HSMs to store the keys and do the cryptographic operations on them so that the key material cannot be extracted, and our customers can feel safe that even in the event of a breach, most of our data is still secure. We work largely for that with HSM vendors, and we have developed tooling to measure the performance and functionality of HSMs. So if you go on MasterCard's GitHub and you work with HSMs, there's a lot of tools that we have published that you might find interesting. So let's get on to quantum computing. I think that's why most of you are here. And I want to structure the talk by looking at the challenges that are technically there for quantum computers. To do that, I want to estimate the risk from basically three angles. I want to look at other technologies, as I said before, that have surfaced in the last 100 years. Then I want to look at the unique challenges that quantum bits give us. And I also want to look at recent research, which has known negative results for some of the quantum algorithms. Then, as you are probably all aware, NIST has standardized a number of quantum-resistant ciphers last year. So I have a slide on that and just want to give an opinion, what we could do with them, and look at our best defenses that we can use today to protect ourselves from future quantum computers. So why are quantum computers such a threat to cryptography? So a quantum bit basically can have the state 0 and 1 at the same time. And then when you read it out, only then that bit actually gets defined. So they behave a bit as if they proceed all possible paths to a solution simultaneously. And all of these paths have a probability amplitude when you actually do the readout of that quantum bit. So if we conceptually think of quantum computing as a quantum experiment, then we want to set our experiment up in a way so that the outcome guides the most likely end state. And that end state should be able to allow us to do something that a classical computer can't do really well. So the fear is basically that when quantum computers come around, our current cryptographic constructions will not be safe anymore. For example, the security of a hash function or a cipher could be significantly reduced. Like if we look at AES 128 bits that we use largely today, it could be reduced by a quantum computer to only 64 bits, which is sort of in the area where single DES is, which nobody's using anymore because a single DES key can be broken today for $300 on the internet in 24 hours guaranteed. The other thing is that quantum algorithms and the steps to break our classical or our current cryptography are largely classical algorithms where the quantum computer may only take a single step in there. So maybe the root of the work is done by the classical computer, and then the quantum algorithm is only a small piece, and it can be fairly easily and efficiently be computed. So that looks like a big risk for modern cryptography. So firstly, before I get into the algorithm side and stuff, I just wanted to briefly look at technologies that we had in the last years. I want to start with the computer, which you are all very familiar with, which is basically currently operated at about room temperature and uses your normal cooling methods like air and water and stuff like that, and uses moderate amount of energies and can be operated on a normal energy grid endpoint. Computers started out with vacuum tubes. You remember the large first computers in the 50s, like a football field or something like that, and then transistors came up in the 1960s, but still the construction was reasonably easy. And whenever we saw an evolution in the computers, that was sort of financed by the previous generation of computers and the business benefit that they could give. And the evolution in computers has always then opened up new markets for these computers, so that today we have them in our phones, in our IoTs, in our desktops, and laptops, and whatever. Generally for society, they provide high utility through their programmability and are mass-produced and readily available everywhere. So if we wanted to replace them in today's society, we would probably have to go back to the abacus, and I just imagine every one of you here sitting with an abacus and instead of their browser in front of them. That would be probably very difficult for today's society to go through. So next technology I wanted to look at are superconductors. They came about in 1900 when people were experimented with liquid helium and mercury and found that when they cooled mercury with helium to almost 0 kelvins, so to minus 270 degrees Celsius, all of a sudden, all of the resistance of that mercury went away, and you could just pump energy through, power through it without any resistance. So people have invested a lot of time, effort, and research into superconductors and have made them now to high-temperature superconductors, which only require liquid nitrogen at minus 170 degrees Celsius for cooling. And so, but at any rate, they still require some specialist tooling for operating, like you can't work with liquid nitrogen just at home or something like that. So consequently, there's not really a mass market for them, even though they have really great properties like reducing your electrical resistance. Just imagine how your power bill would go down if everything was a superconductor in your home, or how they enable frictionless movement. You can see here the magnet floating on top of a superconductor, so you could use it to have trains or cars that float over the roads and reduce our energy consumption significantly. So if we look at them after a bit more than 100 years, today they are largely used in every city, in the larger hospitals for magnetoresonance imaging. So we have approximately one of these superconductors per major hospital. And in real life, we largely replace these superconductors with copper wire these days. The last technology I want to look at before I actually go to quantum computers is fusion, which has been around since 1950 and which requires extremely high temperatures and pressures to operate, but promises like almost unlimited energy with little radioactivity during operation, and would have got significant benefits for society if it ever worked. But since 1950, so in the last 70 years, we haven't been able to produce a single energy positive reactor, although we spent billions of dollars in the last 70 years. They are also, funnily, one of the largest consumers of superconductors because they, to generate the magnetic fields inside, need superconductors to actually make fission work. So in real life, we replace them with normal reactors that actually give energy out, or we just harvest energy from the big fission reactor that's in the sky by using solar, wind, and other green energies. So imagine where we could be today if we had invested all of the money that we have put into fusion instead into green energy. Like maybe we would all be driving green cars these days, and it would be a slightly different society. So now let's look at quantum computers. The quantum bits, as I said before, are fairly brittle, and they require super low temperatures to operate. So you need liquid helium-3, which you can only breed using nuclear reactors from deuterium, or tritium actually. And then it's reasonably expensive, but it cools down really good, better than helium, your normal helium that you can get. But if we look at what they can do today, we are like at a number of qubits that can still easily be simulated on a classical computer these days. And so right now, even though we have algorithms which I talked about earlier, which promise to break cryptography, they don't provide a big advantage over our classical computers. And they also require a lot of insulation from radiation, because if like a cosmic ray went into your quantum bits, they would also decay or change state. So that's also not what you want. IBM has constructed a number of quantum systems and made them publicly available. So if you go onto the IBM website, you can find that they have got 20 systems worldwide currently in operation, and you can rent them for $1.62 per second. That gives you access to 2 times 27 qubits. They also have more advanced systems with 433 qubits, but they are only on request if you're an enterprise customer or a government that you can get to. And they are currently trying to build a 1,000 qubit system. For this year, they're touting that they should be able to get to one. So if I look at the technology requirements for these quantum computers, like the cooling requirements, the isolation requirements, and things like that, I would sort of hazard a guess that in 40 years' time, we probably have one in every major city, similar to what we've seen with superconductors and the MRI imaging and stuff like that. But as we've seen yesterday, like predictions about the future are always difficult. Like you saw the talk from Joseph, and so I might also be completely wrong, but I think if I don't give a prediction, then I'm not fulfilling my mission here. So I'm trying to give one. And today, yeah, basically, as I said before, we largely replace these simply with normal computers. So here's a technology comparison which I thought might be sort of informing. So I'm comparing basically computers, superconductors, and quantum computers on different properties. So on mass production, I think like your computers, yes, they're everywhere, they're mass produced and stuff like that. Your superconductors, maybe not so much, but for the MRI, we have like standardized ways of constructing superconductors and using them. Whereas your quantum computers are still very much unique systems that get produced in prototype quantities. As we've discussed earlier, computers are largely self-financed innovation, so we get from one generation to the next by just the revenue that these generate for society. For superconductors, I think the research is largely, and the development is largely driven by our fusion reactors. And then for quantum computers, it's basically government investment these days and large corporate players that think they will have an edge in the market in the future. So it's a bet on the future. If we look at energy consumptions, like our normal computers are reasonably small and don't consume much energy, like our phones and stuff like that, we can carry them around with a battery. And our superconductors are a bit more energy hungry, so we typically can't operate them on just your normal grid endpoint. And our quantum computers require really a lot of energy for their cooling. Similar for isolation, where quantum computers also have to be shielded against radiation. And the utility for society is sort of just the opposite again. Normal computers are really good for society. Water, food, and stuff like that is obviously a bit more important for society, but they're pretty close to one of the best tools that we have around. Superconductors, not so much, and if there weren't quantum computers around, then we probably wouldn't notice it much these days. So looking at these graphs, like computers have all the good stuff, and quantum computers largely have the non-desirable attributes. So let's look at a technology risk evaluation based on this. So we don't have currently got a quantum computer that can actually attack any modern cipher at a reasonable key strength. And I don't think that they will exist at a commodity item where you can just go into a shop and buy a quantum computer in the next 40 years, just due to the properties that they have. Then we have the problem that these quantum bits decay over time and that there's a probabilistic element to them. So IBM has a 0.1% error rate per quantum bit currently when they do their operations. So then, as we will see on the next slides, it is reasonably expensive to break a key on a quantum computer, even in 10 to 40 years' time when you have a quantum computer that could break that key. So many people are nowadays afraid about the store now, decrypt later. So basically where large government agencies or nefarious actors just grab all of your traffic that you're doing now and then store it for the next 10 to 40 years or something like that. And then when the quantum computer comes along, they can break all that stuff and recover all your secrets. So, I mean, like, if you look at your typical web traffic these days, like how much of that really is still valuable in 10 years or in 40 years' time? Like what of the secrets that you transfer right now will still be a secret by then? Like your passwords should all have changed. Your keys should all have changed. Everything should be different. And the only thing you can learn is maybe how much money you had on your bank account these days. But that will probably also have changed in 10 to 40 years. Like in 40 years' time, typically states, governments disclose even major secrets like scandals or operations and stuff like that. So with that, I want to actually go into quantum algorithms. So there's largely two algorithms that have been around. One is Peter Shor's algorithm, which allows us to do discrete logarithms for breaking public keys cryptography. So that's your RSA, your Diffie-Hellman, your elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman algorithms. And then there's Grover's algorithm, which is touted to break your AES and your hashes. because it can invert any Boolean function with effort n half. So if you have n bits, instead of requiring 2 to the n operations to invert it, you only require 2 to the n half operations to invert it. So that would mean that a AES key, as I said earlier, would be reduced to the strength that is approximately close to a single desk key today. So the one issue with these algorithms is possibly the short lifetime of qubits, because like if you want to operate on millions of qubits, which you need to crack an RSA 2048-bit key, like the best evaluation that we have today is 20 million qubits to do that, then, which will take you 8 hours, then the short lifetime of a qubit could be sort of a factor to that. And we find that, and I'll go into that in one of the further slides as well, that the readout times for like a quantum computer state increase with a number of qubits. So if you read out only 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or 100 qubits, it's reasonably quick. But as we get to more qubits, the readout time actually goes up. Unfortunately, we haven't got good measurements because we don't have that many qubits yet, but I'm just doing an extrapolation on that. So, but let's look at Shor's algorithm in a bit more detail. So what has happened in the last couple of years? So in 2012, people did a prediction of how many qubits you need for Shor's algorithm. You can see it here. You needed around 1 billion qubits to do Shor's algorithm on an RSA 2048-bit. And then till 2021, it came down to 20 million qubits. So that's like a real nice decrease in the number of qubits that you need for Shor's algorithm. At the same time, IBM started constructing quantum computers, and as you can see, like in 2018, they had their first 5 qubits in a quantum computer, and this year they're aiming for around about 1,000 qubits. So now what you could do is you could just draw a line through the qubits and draw a line through the algorithms and then look at where they meet approximately in the 2030s. And by then you should be able to easily factor an RSA 2048-bit key. Anyone notice something? If you look further in the future? If you look further in the future, if you look at the bottom of that, on the very right-hand side there, 2036, we would actually, just based on algorithm improvements, be able to factor a 2048-bit RSA key with a current number of qubits. But that doesn't seem to be quite realistic, so something might be a little bit amiss here. So maybe we should draw the graph a little bit different. So actually, you find this graph in a popular YouTube video. The URL is there. And it's a really great video. I recommend it because it really explains quantum cryptography really well and how these algorithms work. So I highly recommend watching it, although I don't agree with the prediction that they make. So if we look at Shor, then and to do a different approach, like not quite as optimistic, like exponential is a really steep curve. If we just look at a power curve, which is still your x to an exponent, but the x has changed, not the exponent changes, then we get a better fit on the curves. So the R square goes to a more reasonable value. And we also see that the improvement will likely take us into the 2040s at the very least before these two curves would touch each other. So the other thing is that the extrapolation that we're doing currently is basically based on 4 or 5 measurements. Like we had 4 improvements in algorithms, and then we have constructed 5 types of computers so far, and the 5th type of computer for 1,000 qubits is in the making. So if you do an extrapolation over tens of years based on 4 or 5 measurements, you might be really far off because it's a low number of measurements. I talked already about the last point on this slide. And go to the next slide. So let's sum it all up. Here's the reaction time I talked about earlier. So That's the graph here, the reaction time. IBM publishes it in circuit layer operations per second, or CLOPS, which is basically your readout time. So if we look at Shor's algorithm, and we had 20 million probabilistic qubits, where we currently sit at less than 1,000 and aim to get to 1,000 today, then with an error rate of less of 0.1%, which matches our current error rate, we can factor our RSA in 8 hours, assuming a cycle time that matches our current cycle time and a reaction time of 10 milliseconds for reading out these 20 million qubits. Currently, our reaction times for 5 qubits sit at 0.5 of a millisecond, and for 100 qubits sit a bit above 1 millisecond. So if we extrapolate from there to 20 million qubits, we might find that 10 milliseconds for readout time is optimistic, but I don't want to do an exponentiation to 20 million because we travel a kilometer and the next stop is Mars. That's not really realistic. However, we know already what 1 second on a quantum computer costs today, which is $1.62 if you go run it at IBM. So if we did this, if we just ran a quantum computer today for 8 hours to just break a single RSA key, it would cost us $57,800 US. So 1 RSA key, 2048 bit, 8 hours, almost 60,000 US. Okay, that's Shor. Let's look at the other algorithm, Grover. So there's a paper out. Sorry, I wanted to quote from the paper because I found it a really good paper. So it's been published in March this year, just 2 months ago, not quite even, 1.5 months ago. And they found that if you wanted to implement Grover's algorithm on a real-world quantum computer, you would have to drive the noise in that in that quantum computer down exponentially. So the more qubits you have for Grover's algorithm, you see that lambda divided by square root of 2 to the n is the number of qubits. So you have actually an exponential decrease in noise that you have to overcome. And they say in the text, basically manipulating tens of qubits with precisions better than 1 part in a billion for a total of billions of gates is, in our view, completely unrealistic. That's for 40 qubits. If we go to 80 qubits, then there's again a factor 1,000,000 on top of that. And 80 qubits doesn't break you a 128-bit AES key. It only gets you to 2/3 of the way. And that's, again, a factor of 1,000,000 in the noise, better than the already completely unrealistic stuff for 40 qubits. Now imagine what happens when you actually want to break an AES key. It just doesn't work anymore because the error rates have to become exponentially small. And they say that quantum simulators will always be faster at the algorithm. So they say you can simulate currently 40 qubits on a workstation, and you can potentially simulate 80 to 100 qubits maybe on a supercomputer. But if you wanted to break, if you had any more than that in qubits, then you would take an astronomical running time and you would have to drive your errors down below any reasonable margin. So it's not realistic to run Grover on a quantum computer. So let's sum that up. Grover implementation on quantum is completely unrealistic. So that means basically our current block ciphers and hashes seem to be secure with current key length. We don't need to go to AES 256 all of a sudden, which many people tout as the thing to do because quantum is just in front of you. You can actually stay with AES 128 for the foreseeable future, it seems. Looking at Shor, which can be used to break your public key encryption, a single key will cost you 8 hours, 60 grand, and requires 20 million qubits. Most protocols, like for example your TLS 1.3, use perfect forward secrecy these days. So they basically have a fresh ephemeral Diffie-Hellman key for each handshake. So that means every connection gets a new key that you have to break. So for each connection that you make, you have to pay probably in excess of $60,000 to actually break it. So that basically makes it then unlikely for the store now decrypt later scenario, where you just grab all of the comms that you have today, and then when the quantum computer comes along, you can just break everything, because the running time of 8 hours per connection will be unrealistic given the scarcity of the quantum computers based on the resources that they use. And so you will be only able to crack maybe the most valuable messages, or messages from the most valuable actors. But your average communication, like your business stuff and your consumer stuff, is very much safe, I think. Like maybe somebody spends the money to break the encryption that's used by an embassy or something like that, but certainly not the encryption that we guys use every day. Okay. I want to quickly look also at what NIST did in the last couple of years. So they started a competition in 2016 to actually find quantum-resistant algorithms for cryptography, public key algorithms. And that ran to July this year, so a total of 6 years. And just in the last year, just before the competition closed, actually 2 algorithms that survived the previous rounds. In the final round, they were and were in the final round, were actually broken. A rainbow algorithm and the supersingular isogeny Diffie-Hellman algorithms were both broken on standard computers. And consequently, they couldn't be standardized anymore. And what survived was, or what got standardized was Crystal's Kyber and Crystal's Dilithium and Falcon and Sphinx Plus. So Crystal's Kyber is the only encryption algorithm that's in there, the only public key encryption algorithm. The other 3 at the bottom are all signature algorithms. And then in December 2022, a paper came out that attacked Crystal's Kyber on the ARM platform using AI. And basically, it's not clear how much of a breach that is, but it sort of shows that there are maybe attacks against these algorithms using other technologies where we might just want to give them a bit more time still to mature. So what do we do? As we saw, like Grover is really no threat to classical symmetric encryption. So our AES and SHA-2 and SHA-3 will probably not be broken by a quantum computer. For sure, we actually need exponential growth in quantum computers, or at least the power growth to be there in the 2040s. And then the algorithm improvements also would have to have a similar curve and not sit at the 20 million mark. And if you look at algorithm developments, like the mathematicians go for it and find an algorithm that they can use to solve a given problem, and then they try to optimize it and make big steps at the start, but the longer they work on it, they get diminishing return on the work. So at some stage, they concede that the algorithm cannot be optimized any further. So the prediction of getting much lower than 20 million quantum bits is based on the fact like that hitting these 2 in 2014 would mean that the current rate of advances from the mathematicians would continue unabated, and they don't hit a roadblock and can continue optimizing the algorithms further. I'm not sure if that's really possible, but I didn't spend like years investigating that stuff, and I don't know too much about it, but like just based on experience, I would think there's probably a barrier that they hit where it's not possible to optimize SHOR any further from a mathematical standpoint. So then if we look at the cost, almost 60 grand US for 8 hours for a single key, for 2048-bit key. In the future, when you actually have a quantum algorithm that can solve a problem, probably the cost of the quantum computers will go up because more people will be using it. And so then also the time it takes and the cost makes probably store now, decrypt later not very attractive. I think the NIST quantum-resistant algorithms need a little bit more time in cryptanalysis. And what can we do now? I think we should all move to algorithms that actually offer 128-bit security. So that means moving from your RSA 2048-bit keys to RSA 3072 or ECC 256, which puts you again out of reach. So 2048-bit RSA is only on the 112-bit security level, which is deprecated by NIST. So if you just follow NIST guidelines and go to the key strengths that they prescribe, you will already have a reasonably comfortable security margin in there. Then you need to rotate your keys and your secrets regularly, use key derivation, use perfect forward secrecy in your protocols. That means if somebody actually captures your traffic, it's completely economically not feasible, not interesting to actually break that traffic anymore. The only thing that I think which we actually need to look at is maybe reducing certificate lifetime also of our root CAs, because it could become interesting to break a root CA key. And typically root CAs are 20 to 30 years lifetime these years. And they have reasonably weak keys in comparison, like your 2048-bit RSA or your 3072-bit RSA keys. So, but I think the threat of that is still 10 or more years away till they actually get broken, and by then we likely have quantum-resistant signature algorithms that we can use for these certificates. There's 3 already standardized by NIST, so chances are that one of them is really good and survives and can be used for our certificates. So what has MasterCard done? MasterCard in 2021 published first quantum-resistant contactless payment system called ECOS. And it basically uses the principle of perfect forward secrecy to have a new key for each payment. That basically promises you that your payments will be safe, secure, and convenient, even in the face of quantum computers. And yeah, with that, I would like to give references to all of the images that are used in this talk, and thank all of the artists and creative people who make material freely available on the internet. And thank you all for your attention. I'm open for questions.
So we do have time for a couple of questions. There are a few in the Q&A app that I'll go through. So from Kyle, what do you think is the biggest risk to cryptography at the moment?
I think the biggest risk is actually breaches where people can extract keys, like for your average enterprise. Like if you have a vulnerability in one of the libraries that your web stack uses or something like that, people get onto the server and are able to extract your keys. So if you have like your keys in hardware security modules, like your most important ones and stuff like that, that will help you quite a lot to mitigate that risk. The other risk that I see currently is that people are making poor choices in the algorithms that they use. So many people still use, say, AES CBC or RSA with PKC as 1.5 or something like that for their encryption needs. So I would recommend to move to AEA ciphers, like your AES GCM or your AusCERT2023 Poly 1305, stuff like that. And also move to elliptic curve cryptography where possible, and move to more secure constructions for your RSA and stuff like that, like your RSA PSS and things like that.
We're almost out of time, so for the final question, is the slide pack able to be shared?
Yes, I can do that. I don't know how. Just contact me on my LinkedIn and I'll send it to you. The LinkedIn is again here on the last slide at the bottom.
All right. Can everyone please give it up for George?